Mike, I had plans, dreams, and even a secret savings account for a global tour we intended to take in a few years. I noticed my wife, Tracy, blushing deeply and continuing to glow pink as she conversed with a few colleagues during our employer's annual staff meeting at a small college in mid-September. I was standing around 15 feet away from Tracy when I observed her reaction while she was engaged in a sensible conversation with another group of colleagues. She was speaking with Rafe Searcy, the new associate professor of English literature, and Janet Barnes from the administration. Given that it was a Christian college, I doubted either of the other two had shared an inappropriate joke, which meant there was only one explanation for Tracy's skin color, especially her consistent hue. She was clearly aroused. After 23 years of marriage and 25 years together, you know almost everything about your partner, even if you don't pay much attention. If you pay attention, that is. In that moment, I understood the reason behind some recent oddities in Tracy's behavior that I hadn't recognized as strange until then. Tracy and I were best friends, lovers, and parents to two wonderful children. Unlike many couples, we could spend our days together without tiring of each other's company. We could discuss anything from the intimate to history, and we often laughed about many aspects of these discussions. I've always believed that the best way to test marital compatibility is to take a long ride with your potential spouse. If you haven't killed that person by the end of the ride, you should marry them immediately. Tracy and I fit that profile. In my opinion, our intimate life was great. Yes, it had cooled from the white-hot passion of our courtship and early marriage, but it had picked up again when our younger daughter left for college the year before. Being empty nesters for the better part of a year seemed to reignite our more lustful urges, and we alternated between slow, passionate lovemaking and hardcore physical activity 3 or 4 times a week. Something changed 2 months ago, and since it had mostly changed for the better, I didn't question it. Tracy was always a willing and active participant in our intimate life, but she was rarely the initiator. Suddenly, she began to initiate as much as I did, and the physical connection was off the charts. However, we no longer made love. It was just sex. It was great, but our focus had shifted. I didn't ask myself this question then, but looking back, I realized that was a mistake. Throughout the entire event, Tracy and Rafe were never more than 5 feet apart while walking. Now that I knew what I was looking at, I was able to determine that Tracy's glow lit up every time she was near Rafe, even when I was nearby. This usually disappeared quickly when I showed up, but as soon as Tracy left me, she acquired a companion to communicate with. I secretly kept my eyes on this couple, although I didn't have to try very hard. Tracy seemed to forget about everyone else when Rafe was around. I never saw her look around to see where her husband was throughout the evening. She made sure to lightly touch Rafe at every opportunity. My emotions ranged from nervousness and fear at first to complete rage after I became convinced of the reality of everything I was seeing. What I saw definitely looked like the end of my marriage. I practically had to drag my wife away from Rafe at about 11. She didn't look happy when I showed up and told her it was time to go. Anger flared in her eyes for a moment. Then she backed off, but it wasn't fast enough for me not to notice her look again. 23 years of marriage, and the evening's discussion usually flowed freely on the way home. But that night, I deliberately sat quietly, waiting for Tracy to begin. She seemed preoccupied with something for a while, looking out the passenger window until she realized how awkward the silence was. Then she quickly jumped into the void with some meaningless conversation about how badly dressed the college president's wife was. I wasn't very responsive. "I'm really tired. I'm going to go to bed," Tracy said when we got home. "Are you coming?" I wasn't sure if she was just trying to avoid the evening's conversation or if she was trying to get me to go to bed so she could deal with any disappointment from the excitement. Anyway, I didn't bite and told her I was going to watch some TV. I think she looked disappointed. The next day was Saturday, so I was able to spend the entire day outside doing yard work, which gave me plenty of time to calm down and think things through. If Tracy had any idea that things weren't so simple in our universe, she did a good job of not showing it. The following week, things seemed a little tense at home. For my part, I tried to play it cool, but I used the Find My Phone app on my iPhone about 6 times a day. In every case, Tracy was where she was supposed to be, so to speak. At night, she seemed more than ready to have a night, although she seemed a little reserved the first night. After that, she returned to her earlier manner. As usual, I made sure to please her, giving her several pleasures. The following Monday, nothing had changed. But on Tuesday, the Find My Phone app told me that Tracy had gone home at lunchtime. 15 minutes later, I quietly entered my home and confirmed that my marriage was over. They weren't exactly quiet in our bedroom, so I didn't need to go up the stairs to confirm that Tracy's partner was indeed Rafe. "Oh my God, Rafe!" Tracy shouted at one point during the celebration. "Oh God, baby, you are the best." The last one really hurt. It took all my self-control not to run into the bedroom and hurt the man. However, I did not enter the room because I knew that if I started beating him, I would not stop until I killed him. None of them were worth jail time. Tracy, I am fully aware that it sounds self-serving to say that I love my husband more than anything in the world, but it is the honest truth. I loved him for a quarter of a century, and I hope to love him for at least another quarter of a century. However, in the interest of full disclosure, I also have to admit that I have a lover on the side. A lover who is so wonderful that I could not give him up, although I know that sooner or later, I would have to do it because it would be the only way to save my marriage. Mike, my wonderful husband, would be devastated to learn that I had an affair. That's why I did everything I could to hide my affair. However, I was not stupid enough to think that I would never be caught. I knew that the longer this went on, the more my chances of getting caught increased. Mike has been my rock for the last 25 years. We were married for 23 years and had 2 wonderful children. He was my best friend, my soulmate, and a wonderful intimate partner. We talked about everything and laughed a lot, well, until recently. I had no intention of taking a lover when I met Rafe Cersei. For some reason, when he walked into the administration building a couple of days before school started, my life literally changed. Rafe was 30 years old, 6 feet 2 inches, very fit, with short brown hair and soft gray eyes. He was handsome but no George Clooney. I didn't work the rest of the day because I couldn't get Rafe out of my head. When I got home, I'm pretty sure I almost killed Mike with intimacy. I know Mike fell asleep exhausted and with a big smile on his face. I would never tell him that I wasn't thinking about him while we were intimate. I continued to be intimate with Mike until he dropped for the next 2 weeks. Then, my dear husband opened the door of opportunity for me as he had to leave town for the night the following Wednesday. I knew it was wrong, but I was practically shaking when I called Rafe on Monday morning and invited him to lunch on Wednesday afternoon. I had already checked Rafe's schedule and knew he didn't have any classes on Wednesday afternoon. I took administrative time off. Rafe met me at a small Italian restaurant and we had a good lunch, talked, and laughed a lot. I know I laughed a lot and had a hard time keeping my hands off his arms and hands while we talked. Rafe and I hadn't discussed it, but he knew what anticipation was like. He smiled back at me a lot, held my hand for a while, and even grinned sometimes. I knew he felt the same connection. Being the gentleman he is, Rafe paid the bill and then quietly asked where I lived. 10 minutes away from here. Leave your car and I'll drive. I answered in a voice that sounded much more confident than I actually was. Knowing that Mike wouldn't be home until Thursday evening saved me a lot of anxiety about the upcoming event. But I have to admit, I was nervous. I knew that after having 2 children and being 45 years old, I didn't have the mature young body that Rafe was probably used to. I loved Mike with all my heart and soul, but my time with Rafe was definitely going to happen, and I wasn't going to deny myself the pleasure. And I didn't feel guilty about it. I drove my car into the garage and closed the door. The next 10 hours were some of the best of my life. Rafe obviously felt the same connection as I did, and everything we did was amazing. When I met Mike, I always considered him a great bed partner. Rafe completely reset the dial. Everything we did was fantastic, too, and Rafe finally got into an Uber to pick up his car. I felt as spineless as a jellyfish and as brainless as a sponge. I remember a lot of screaming and some crying, and I'm pretty sure it came from me, but I really can't swear to it. Hell, I couldn't swear on my own name now. I knew what it was like to be senseless. I definitely wanted this. You are an amazing woman, Tracy. It was probably the best intimacy of my life, Rafe said quietly as we snuggled together after our second connection of the evening. I really meant it. Mike was an excellent lover in his own right. However, the way I connected with Rafe was beyond praise. It was almost as if we were doing something completely different from what Mike and I were doing. I couldn't feel guilty for doing something so amazing. In my mind, intimacy with Rafe was separate from my life with my husband. Nights with Mike were about emotion. Intimacy with Rafe was about amazing physical sensations. We did this twice a week. I knew this couldn't last forever, but I was going to enjoy it while I could. Mike. I knew that Tracy was supposed to be served with divorce papers on Wednesday at 10 a.m. 2 minutes passed before my phone rang. "No, Mike, I don't want a divorce," she screamed over the phone when I answered. "I don't want a cheating woman as my wife. But we don't always get what we want, do we?" I answered. "I can explain. I made a decision for myself," she cried. "The one we need to talk about," Tracy said, ending the conversation. "Since you ignored our vows, I also made a decision for myself." "So no, we don't need to talk about your decision," I replied. I could actually be productive at work, but unfortunately, I knew what I would be faced with when I returned home. And Tracy did not disappoint. "Don't you think you should have talked to me before you filed for divorce?" Tracy screamed at me when I walked in. "After all, we have been married for 23 years. Those 23 years didn't seem to matter to you when you constantly cheated on me." I shot back at her. I could tell from her eyes and smudged makeup that Tracy had been crying. I myself didn't feel very cheerful. "I love you, Mike, really. What I had with Rafe was just physical. It was a decision for yourself," she finished for me. Tracy looked worried, to say the least. "I'm sorry, I heard you, but I think you're overreacting. Can we talk about this?" she asked. "I don't understand what you're talking about, Tracy. You cheated several times, probably a lot more than I know," I said. "I know it looks bad. I know it was just a decision for you, Tracy," I repeated. "Why don't you explain it to me?" I thought it was obvious that I was being sarcastic, but Tracy seemed encouraged by my reaction and actually smiled at me. "I can't explain it, but it's like we have some kind of special physical connection. Is this the best intimacy you've ever had?" she asked. Her eyes became as big as saucers, and for the first time, she looked scared. "You heard?" she asked with tears and fear at the same time. "Do you want me to replay this for you? I was at home last week. You two were so busy that you didn't hear me," I said. "I won't be able to fix this mistake," she said, at least having the prudence to lower her eyes in shame. "It was purely physical, Mike. I love you. I can't express to you how much I love you. Can't we at least try to consult?" she asked. I knew she was right about the last one, and it hurt the most. I still loved her, although not as much as 2 weeks ago. 25 years of loving someone don't just pass away in an instant. Tracy, even though I knew what I was doing was risky, I was still shocked when I was served with divorce papers at my office on Wednesday afternoon. I had no idea that Mike knew about my affair. Hell, not only did he know, but apparently he caught Rafe and me in bed one time and he had the video. Even worse, he heard me tell Rafe that he was the best I'd ever had. I knew that I would never be able to satisfactorily explain to my husband the connection that Rafe and I shared. But I knew that Mike's love for me would win out in the end. I'd start by trying to get Mike to agree to let me keep Rafe as an outside lover and go back to staying married. As a last resort, I suggested seeing a psychologist. He agreed. Our first meeting with the consultant did not go well for me. The consultant was a woman, but like Mike, she couldn't understand that I simply couldn't ignore my attraction to Rafe. I guess I expected her to show more understanding, maybe be on my side. "So, your vows meant nothing to you, Mrs. Mannon?" she asked after I finished telling my story. "No, they mean everything to me, but this is different," I explained. "This is unlike anything I've ever experienced before. You are a woman, you've felt aroused before. Well, it's like that, only much stronger. Like I've been drugged," I said. I could see from her face that she didn't believe me. Men are often accused of thinking with their little brains, but women are guilty of it, too, if today's divorce statistics are any indication, the consultant said calmly. Lightning strike is a real thing, but most people understand that they have a choice to ignore it. You have decided to give in to your base desires, she continued. I couldn't believe that this woman was essentially telling me that I had no self-control. It was tantamount to calling me a whore. Then she asked me a question that probably sealed the divorce deal. If Mike could forgive you and take you back, do you think you would be able to resist your physical desires and remain faithful to your husband? She asked. I just sat there, afraid to even answer that question. Mike would know better than a lie detector that I was lying. I love you, Mike. Please, could you work with me on this? I don't love it, but I have to have it. This is the best intimacy of my life. Don't ask me to give this up, I cried. I glanced quickly at Mike, expecting to see a sign that his resolve was weakening. In the end, he admitted that he still loved me, but I saw dead eyes. I'm sorry, Tracy. I really love you, but I won't give you the right to cheat on me, and I can't forgive what you've already done, he said. I'm sorry. I wasn't man enough for you, he continued. You were more than enough man for me, Mike. I love you, I said. I do not love him. I'll give it up if that's what keeps us together. Please don't give up on us. I didn't do this. You abandoned us the first time you had a night with him, he blurted back. Don't blame it on me. I just never knew how selfish you are. In the end, it's all about you, and you just don't love me as much as I love you, I retorted. 2 weeks after I last saw the consultant, I was in my bedroom with Rafe. I didn't know Mike was watching me, but at that moment I didn't care. I had seen Rafe on campus the day before and asked him when I returned to my office. He was more than willing to show up for a lunchtime date. Yes, the intimacy was outstanding. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. During this time, Rafe and I had intimacy dozens of times. The intimacy had always been fantastic. He was my kryptonite. I loved Mike, but I lusted after Rafe. I had to have him. I knew I would never get Mike back because of this. He didn't love me enough to let me have Rafe. I couldn't believe that Tracy was actually trying to get me to let her keep her boyfriend and stay married to me. If you really love me, what nonsense, I thought to myself. Forget it. There's no way we're staying married. Period. I may have been an ignorant cuckold, but I wasn't going to be that stupid. I was very surprised that the marriage counselor we hired wasn't living in the same dreamland as Tracy. She practically called my wife a liar in our first session, and it hadn't gotten any better since then. She ended our sessions after the fourth by telling my wife that I would never back down from my position and that she supported me. I thought Tracy was going to die when the counselor told her to stop the sessions. I don't know if Tracy asked my daughters to try to stand up for her, but they both tried very hard. You're destroying the family, Dad. My youngest cried when I told her about this. No, baby, I'm not destroying the family. Your mother did it. I'm just making it legal, I replied. She twisted her face and furrowed her brows. I could tell she was thinking hard. You're probably right, Daddy, she finally said. Rafe, I didn't really want to ruin Tracy's marriage, but I saw it more as her husband's problem. I knew she really loved this guy, but we had an amazing physical connection, and the intimacy was almost otherworldly. If she wanted to have me, hell yes, I was going to give it to her. I suppose I couldn't blame him for not wanting to be cuckolded. But again, that's between him and Tracy. My job is not to wonder why Tracy stayed away from me for 2 weeks after Mike filed for divorce. When he didn't relent and take her back, we resumed our romance. In fact, things actually got better because when Mike got out of the way, I got all her physical attention. I have to say that intimacy with Tracy was the best intimacy I've ever had. Even though Tracy was great in bed, I never thought we'd last very long. At 45, she was not fit for marriage. I knew I wanted to have my own children, and she already had 2 grown children. Besides, if she could do what she did to the person she said she loved more than anything in the world, what could I expect? I continued to look for Miss Cersei, although I did not talk to Tracy about it. She already had enough on her plate after losing Mike. That all changed when I found Lucy Ralston about a year after Tracy's divorce. She was 24 years old, had short brown hair, a dancer's body, and we hit it off from the start. I didn't tell Tracy about Lucy at first, but I finally confessed after about 2 months. I knew I had hurt Tracy's feelings, but it didn't seem like Tracy really loved me. She and I were absolutely connected physically, but emotionally we were just good friends. When Lucy and I decided to be exclusive, I had to tell Tracy that it was over between us. But I abandoned my husband for you, Tracy cried when I told her. No, that's not true. You left your husband to have a night with me. We never existed. It was all about fantastic intimacy, and it was your choice. But it's not my choice. My choice is to have a wife and family, I said. Tracy was devastated when Rafe told her he was going to be exclusive with Lucy and wouldn't have intimacy with her anymore. But I abandoned my husband for you, she cried when he told her. Rafe gave her a look that I could only interpret as pity. No, that's not true. You left your husband to have intimacy with me, he corrected. I knew he was right, but still, it was awkward when my children found out about it. Mike didn't sugarcoat the pill when we broke up, telling the kids I cheated on him several times for the best intimacy of their mother's life. The kids weren't happy with me, but they eventually came to terms with it. Telling them a year and a half later that Rafe had left me to start a family with a younger woman just made me look pathetic. Even to me. I didn't ask them not to tell their father, but I really hoped they wouldn't. I admit that I do not completely agree with this development of events in my life. When the kids came home for Christmas, my oldest daughter just casually asked if they were going to meet my boyfriend. At that moment, I admitted that we were no longer together. So, you gave up a quarter of a century of love with your dad for a couple of years of nights with some younger guy? Oh, wait. Sorry, a couple of years of the best intimacy of your life, my daughter said sarcastically. Couldn't say much. I lowered my eyes to the floor. Losing Rafe still didn't affect me as much as losing Mike. I mean, Rafe was an amazing bed partner, but Mike was my soulmate, my everything. Coming home to an empty apartment every day after work was heartbreaking. But at least I could look forward to amazing intimacy several times a week when Rafe left. I had nothing left. The loneliness turned out to be terrible. So, I guess I was pretty interested in dating at first. I was surprised that most of the interested men were 30 plus, and some were even 20 plus. Maybe this old woman didn't look so bad for being 47 years old. I enjoyed the company of several men, although none of them even came close to the quality of my ex. Maybe it's because I hadn't dated in so long, but I've definitely noticed that men's expectations have changed over the past quarter century, especially among younger guys. They seem to expect intimacy on the first date, and if that didn't happen, there usually wasn't a second date. It wasn't that I was opposed, but I also wasn't going to jump into bed with just anyone and everyone. When intimacy happened from my point of view, he was usually quite good, and all my partners seemed very pleased. Most of the intimacy was just intimacy, though. I guess I haven't dated anyone long enough to make real love. I really missed making love. When talking to the children, I tried to discreetly ask about Mike. I didn't think he was dating at all, which meant I still had a chance to get him back. I knew the odds weren't very good, but why wouldn't he date me if he was going to date other divorced women? We had a wonderful marriage for 23 years. However, I knew that I would have to be the aggressor if this happened. Mike, maybe you'd like to have coffee with me sometime? I said after he answered my call a few months later. I know I hurt you with what I did, and I'm sorry about it, but I really wish we could be friends, the kind that sit and drink coffee together and maybe even eat food together sometimes. I really miss sitting with you and chatting. Sure, Tracy. I think we could do that, he answered cautiously. I really miss your company, and I think I'm in a much better place now than I was, I said. We set up our coffee date for the next Saturday. Mike, I have to admit that Tracy looked fantastic when she walked into the Starbucks where we agreed to meet. I haven't seen her for 2 years, and time hasn't harmed her at all. She didn't look any older, and her weight was probably the same as the last time I saw her. She had her hair cut to shoulder length, and the tight sweater she was wearing really showed off her full breasts. She was wearing almost no makeup, which only emphasized the fact that she was a beautiful woman. I stood up to greet her and stopped in my tracks, not sure if I should hug her or not. She answered that question for me by walking right into my space, gently kissing my cheek and hugging me. I hugged her back. How come no one has dragged you away yet? A question involuntarily burst out. She blushed charmingly. Apparently, not everyone has such good taste, she answered with a smile on her face. We ordered coffee and each received a cake. We talked about a variety of topics, just like when we were married. The conversation was so pleasant that we each drank our second cup of overcaffeinated Starbucks. "That was fun, Tracy," I said as we stood up to leave. "How about next time we have lunch together?" I think I surprised her with this invitation because her eyes widened when she looked at me. "Certainly, that will be great," she said quietly. I called her 2 weeks later and set up a lunch date. It's been over 25 years since I've gone on any kind of date. Absolutely none since Tracy and I got divorced. Although I was devastated by what Tracy had done to me, I tried my best to feign indifference to the general public. However, in reality, it all just tore my heart apart. And after the divorce, I stayed away from all women. One Saturday afternoon, Tracy and I enjoyed a very pleasant lunch at our favorite Italian restaurant. I know she was hoping that I would invite her to my house after dinner, but I walked her to her car in the parking lot, gave her a friendly kiss on the cheek, and headed to my car. Over the next year, we enjoyed several dinners. I didn't want to go beyond that because it gave me more control over the situation, in my opinion. Dinner leads you to what happens after dinner, which leads you to what happens. I did not want to and could not approach this. Mike must have gotten smarter over the years. I knew he enjoyed the time we spent together, but he never invited me to dinner. I figured that at some point he would decide to do this, and it would just be a small step towards spending the night together. I knew he wasn't dating, and I thought if I could rock his world one day, I'd have a chance to win him back. But he just never gave me that chance. Eating at IHOP is hardly conducive to bed sharing. I took the hint and started dating others again. I guess I'll just have to accept it. Tracy messed with my head so much that I didn't actually date another woman for 5 years. I definitely didn't view my lunches with Tracy as dates, although I know she was expecting something. I was in my favorite liquor store, checking out the many brands of tequila available, looking for something new when I felt a presence to my right. She seemed pleasant enough, so I decided she could use my extensive knowledge of distilled spirits. I was just trying to be friendly. "Do you want to drink tequila or make a cocktail?" I asked with a smile on my face. I never dilute good tequila. I drink my tequila like I drink my coffee, straight, without anything, she replied. "Margaritas are good for parties, but when I really drink, I don't mix them." Wow, the woman who holds the key, I thought to myself. I didn't know a single woman who drank tequila properly. For the first time, I turned to face a woman who drinks tequila and looks damn good. There are no rings on her left hand, either. She seemed a little younger than me. She had a head of curly dark brown hair that almost reached her shoulders. Her skin was pale and her eyes sparkling blue. I assumed Irish blood like mine. I didn't realize I was staring at her until I heard her speak, and then realized she was asking me a question. Subtle, very discreet. She grinned when I returned to the real world. I know I blushed. "I'm sorry. I'm just lost," I said weakly. A dozen brands of tequila and a beautiful woman who understands how to drink this tequila. In my world, this doesn't happen often. She smiled at me. I thought she was going to move on when she spoke again. "And what kind of world is this, Mr. Tequila Snob?" "Loserville, USA, ma'am," I muttered. "Ma'am? Did you just call me ma'am?" she asked incredulously. "Wow. Do I look like your mother or something?" "Sorry about that. It's a matter of good manners. My parents are to blame. But no, you don't look like my mother. I loved my mother to death. But even on her best days, she didn't look as good as you." I couldn't believe it actually came out of my mouth. I winced. She looked surprised. Then that look slowly turned into a sly smile. By now, I had a good look at what appeared to be a tight, curvy body for a woman her age. "So why Loserville, Mr. Tequila Snob? If we're being polite, it doesn't look like you'll have any trouble getting a date or two." "I haven't been on a date in 5 years since I divorced my cheating wife," I said quietly. Oh, sorry about that," she said, looking embarrassed. There was an awkward silence for a while. I didn't have enough game to break the deadlock, but luckily, she did. "So, what do you recommend?" she asked, returning to the tequila. "I'm a big fan of Don Julio Blanco, and I also like F's new guy, Sammy Hagar's Santo. But if it's a really special occasion, then choose Don Julio 1942. Damn expensive, but it's really good stuff. How much does it cost? She nodded at me, as it seemed to me, ending the conversation. I grabbed a bottle of Santo from the shelf. Then I thought, what the hell? And extended my hand. Mike Mannon, how would you like to try to kill a next door at my expense? Then you could make a more informed decision, I said, giving her my most sincere look. She grinned again, cheekily looked me up and down, and then accepted my invitation. We went to a nearby bar and spent the next 2 hours sampling tequila. I also made sure to buy us a couple of snacks when we left the bar. I had Rose's phone number. I can't even begin to explain what was going on in my head over the next week. I was thrilled to have a beautiful woman's number, but then, man, I had to call her and set up a date. The last time I went on a date was right before the American Revolution. Crap, I thought. I could take her to a restaurant. Maybe I could find a roller skating rink or bowling alley. My head was spinning. I had a good job and made decent money. For the most part, people seemed to like me. I was well aware of current events and would never talk about politics on a date. I noticed that I was sweating a lot. I realized that one thing had not changed when it came to dating women. They have all the power and they know it. However, she gave me her number without me having to point a gun at her. That should have counted in my favor, shouldn't it? The debate in my mind raged for days and could have gone on much longer if fate had not intervened. Fate disguised as an intern whom I literally stumbled upon in the hallway of the office where I worked. I was trying to decide what to do with Rose when I ran into Anna. She tripped on her 3-inch heel, and I grabbed her arms to keep her from falling, apologizing at the same time. I know I'm not very big, but I don't think you would have noticed that I was there if you hadn't bumped into me, Anna told me after I calmed her down. The problem was that Anna was probably the same age as my youngest daughter. We would talk from time to time, usually with me giving her some fatherly advice about something. She was also my personal consultant on issues of the younger generation. If I needed to explain something generational and I didn't want to call my kids, I would find Anna, and she would explain things to me face-to-face in words that made sense to my 50-year-old brain. Yes, actually, I muttered, probably sounding like a weak buffoon. Anna looked at my face as if she was trying to read the sign. She broke into her signature smile. I was puzzled. This happened often. Maybe this problem is connected with a girl, a woman, she said in her sing-song manner. So, sort of, yes, I think so. I continued to mutter. She looked at me for a few seconds, then made a decision. Okay, you can tell me about it at Murphy's after work, and I don't want any ridicule when I get my ice-cold drink, or you'll be on your own, she lectured. We met at Murphy's later that day. Anna sat opposite me with a very cheerful expression on her face as I worried and stammered, talking about Rose. So, you haven't dated anyone since your divorce 5 years ago, with no one? Wow, I knew you were a little, but not to the same extent, she mimicked. I cringed from this ridicule, but still, I knew that Anna was right. I also knew that she was caring and kind to me. So, how long ago did she give you her number? This month, this year, it was 5 days ago, Anna continued. And if you continue to be smart, I'll turn you over my knee, I warned, only half seriously. Oh, we might both like this, she chirped back. I blushed seriously. Mike, what's the problem? You are not a troll. You have a lot ahead of you. Call her. Anna spent the next half hour telling me about some of the things she and her friends do on dates. I resisted the urge to pull out my notepad and take notes. Can you dance? She asked at one point. Who else has 3 left legs? I said. I'll take that as a no. You know, women really like it when a man asks them to dance. It's a kind of physical force that speeds up the process, she said with a big smile on her face. This is true, seriously. I always thought it was some kind of urban legend, I said. True, 100%. It's something like foreplay, she said, looking me straight in the eyes. La la la, I said, covering my ears. Oh, and by the way, don't forget to bring protection. You can't be too prepared, she said, looking me straight in the eyes. Yes, Mom, I answered sarcastically. I called Rose when I got home that evening and set up a date for the following Saturday. Anna told me not to spend too much time talking about my previous marriage, but to answer honestly any questions Rose asked about it. I felt awkward talking about what happened to a relative stranger, but Rose was very empathetic. She then told me her story of heartbreak, which included a 15-year marriage that ended with her catching her husband in bed with a neighbor. Tracy, the actual physical pain from the syphilis I contracted was nowhere near as bad as the humiliation I experienced in the doctor's office. Don't get me wrong. The doctor and 2 nurses I dealt with were completely professional, but I could tell they were overwhelmed by having to deal with me. It didn't get any better when I listed 6 different men as recent bed partners to notify. Crap, 6 notices. I heard one nurse whisper to another after she looked at my tests for the first time. It's probably good that she's not 25 anymore. I probably would have torn her face off if she had said that out loud to me. But I had to admit to myself that that comment sounded really bad. I haven't thought about it too much, but I've been making good use of being single the last few years. When Rafe left me after Mike divorced me, I probably went a little crazy. I think I may have been looking for someone to replace Mike and Rafe, but if that was the case, nothing even close came up. How could I replace what Mike and I had for 23 years? And how could I replace the incredible intimate connection that I had with Rafe? I don't know. Maybe in my mind, I compensated for quality with quantity. I never really thought about how many men I slept with until I had to report the number and list of my partners. Without a doubt, having intimacy with most of my partners without protection was stupid and irresponsible. It's not like I was drunk. I was always sober enough to know what I was doing, and I always chose guys who looked clean and well-groomed. But it's an old story. When you sleep with someone, you also sleep with everyone they've slept with recently. I just never thought. At least I didn't have to tell anyone about my problem. Mike, Rose, and I got married about a year after our first date. We both still had some trust issues, but we worked through them with love and the help of a really good counselor. I gently pushed Rose away, and we lay on our sides facing each other, both breathing heavily from the exertion. After 25 years of marriage, when both were 75 years old, making love once a week was enough. We spent another 10 minutes kissing and cuddling before falling asleep. To say that Rose was my savior is an understatement. After my divorce from Tracy, I was lost. Hell, I didn't even know how to date. She allowed me to feel my way, sometimes literally, and we kind of grew together. While I wouldn't put money on it, I found a soulmate to grow old with. Tracy, I was a little more leery of choosing partners when I came back into circulation after my problem. This was probably due in part to menopause, partly it's probably because although I looked pretty good when I hit 50, 20 and 30-year-olds weren't looking my way anymore. In fact, since there were far more single women than men between the ages of 40 and 50, the competition in these age groups was quite fierce. If anyone had asked me a few years ago, I would have told them it was a done deal. I was going to grow old with my loving husband, Mike. Because I was stupid, nothing came of it. I greatly overestimated my performance with Mike. I mistook his kindness for weakness. I thought he loved me so much that he would at least forgive me for my wrongdoing several years ago. I moved into a senior living community. My old house was too big for me alone. I see my children and grandchildren every few months. It took years for the relationship I had with my children to return to normal. The relationship between Mike and me remained friendly, although we stopped having lunch after I realized that these lunches would not bring me closer to him. Mike finally started dating again after years of being a recluse. I admit I'm jealous of the way he looks at Rose when the whole family gets together for the holidays. I can't help but notice the adoring looks and sweet mannerisms with which they interact. This makes me sick. It had to be with me. Was it worth it? I asked myself. I never liked the answer. What do you think of what our hero did? What would you do if you were him? Write your opinion in the comments. See you in the next video.